This is the Math Map Book Club, where ordinary parents encourage one another to develop an extraordinary appreciation of math. We love what we know and struggle over the unfamiliar. Through weekly conversation and exploration among friends, we can begin to enjoy ideas that seem difficult. Join our book club as we discover how math helps us to know God and to make Him known.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. It is August the 27th, and we are here for our weekly Math Map Book Club. We are in our 25-26 academic year version, which is emphasizing and focusing on using the Math Map at home. So we thank everybody that joins us live because it is your participation that really helps to make the Math Map meaningful. And why we do it live is so that you can participate and bring your questions. And so we certainly encourage that. And if you're watching at home and are unable to join us live, remember you can always email us questions at the mathmap@classicalconversations.com, and we will be happy to address them here in our next recording. So this week we are on lesson 5, multiplication. And as we do every day, we're encouraging us start with the flashcards. And for some of you, that may mean I start my math time with flashcards, or I start my day with flashcards. The important thing is that you are incorporating some kind of drill into your academic day, right? That you're practicing that grammar, because it's that practicing of the grammar that's going to help to really cement it into our memoria. I laugh because my mom grew up in England, where they did a lot of recitations and a lot of memorization in school. And she remembers so much from her education. Not always is it connected, but she'll hear a song or she'll remember something, and pieces of what she memorized still come back to her 60, 70 years later. So I want us all to be encouraged that when we talk about using the flashcards or drilling information to get it into our memoria, it really is effective in helping our students to retain that information long term. So we've talked about reading the flashcards, celebrating the ones that are mastered, mixing the decks up, letting students choose the cards that would help them to review that lesson, attaching flashcards to daily activities, combining flashcards with the games. And today, a strategy that I thought we could talk about is the idea of just fast facts, moving rapidly through a lot of cards or information. So not necessarily camping out and hinting, right? Instead of doing a lot of hints or prompts, just moving fast. If a student knows it, that's great. If they don't, you read it and you move on. When you do this and you do a lot of cards, there's actually research that shows that it is important to sometimes do volumes of cards, not always short, small numbers of cards, but volumes of cards. Going through it fairly quickly activates your brain in a slightly different way. So there is research that shows that that is an effective way to use flashcards. So I thought I would mention that today as one way. It doesn't have to be the only way, but one way that you can use flashcards is by just going through rapidly through a lot of cards. Does anybody have anything that they did this week or any ideas about flashcards they would like to share? All right. So just remember, you're always welcome to bring your ideas. If you've tried one of these ideas at home and you have a testimony, that would be great. Or if you've done something differently, we'd love to hear about that too. On day one, we encourage you to have a conversation about the cover. And so each week we're going to talk about 5 of our skills of learning. This week we are talking about our dialectic skills, our skills of invention, that are the 5 common topics. So as we look at our cover, I want to encourage you, you don't have to ask all of these questions, that these are just some sample things that you could do if you want to incorporate the topics into that conversation. It is okay to be less explicit about using the skills of learning, but we always want to come back and point you to those skills of learning so that as you are developing how to have these conversations in your home, you can see how to apply those skills of learning. So, talking about what a student likes about a picture or dislikes about a picture, or what a reflection or a quotation means to a student are all valid questions. We are here just to emphasize these skills of learning because we've had parents say that's kind of where we need the most help, is how do we incorporate those skills. So that's what we're doing here. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that you do not have to use these questions to converse about the cover. We are trying to help families to see how they can marry those two things if they want to. So if you're looking at a cover, one thing that you can always ask your students to do is to define the title. What does multiplication mean? Whatever the topic of the week is, ask them, what does that mean? Can you define that word or those words? We know that sometimes a piece of art really grabs you and you really want to talk about that piece of art. But sometimes a piece of art may not be the piece of art that really grabs you, and it may be the quotation and the reflection. One way that you could talk about the quotation and the reflection is to compare them. Are they saying the same thing? Are they saying something different? Is there an overlap? This week, we see that G.K. Chesterton is talking about the idea that God says, do it again. And then we look at our Bible verse from Genesis 1:22, where he says to be fruitful and multiply. Does he only say that once, or does he give us that command more than once? Right? So there's a great way you can compare the quotation and the reflection and see how they might be telling us something new about the topic of our week. When we think about circumstance, we often think about the idea of dimension. So this may be a topic for a student who has been through the math map more than once, because they'll have a glimpse of other domains. But you could ask them how the circumstance of dimension might limit or not limit the topic. So if we're thinking about one-dimensional multiplication, what does that look like? Is there such a thing as two-dimensional multiplication or three-dimensional multiplication? And so that's a great way that you can invite students to pull from their memoria of past journeys through the math map in order to have a conversation about circumstance and the topic of the week. A great way to talk about relationship. When we think of relationship, we oftentimes think of order. Sometimes we may think about cause and effect. So this is more of an ordering question, but you could ask them, what's the relationship between the lesson we did last week, this lesson, and the lesson that we're going to do next week? So for example, this week we could say, well, what's the relationship between addition and multiplication? Why would the math map have chosen to do addition before multiplication? And why might division come after multiplication? Is there a reason for that order? Some weeks you might see the order and some weeks you might not, and that's okay. When we're talking about relationship, these are all exploratory questions. If you are familiar with the challenge program and have used the lost tools of writing, right? We use these common topics to help us invent, to help draw things from our memoria and to create our papers. So there's not necessarily right answers or wrong answers. It might be that a student says, I don't think there's any relationship, and that's okay. But we want to practice with our students, right? How can we talk about relationship? And so that's one way that you could talk about relationship. And then a great testimony question is to ask, is there something in the Bible about our topic this week? And obviously, we see here we've got a Bible verse. We know that the New Testament talks about how Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes. So there are great testimonies about multiplication in the Bible. Other weeks that might be a little bit more challenging to find, but that's a great question to ask, especially older students who may want to go and do a little bit of search and exploration to see if they can find some Bible references that would go along with our topic. Does anybody have any questions or insights on into the conversations about the covers?
It's not really a question, but I'm glad you talked about that you don't always have to talk about the art, because we had a lady that wrote in this week that she wasn't particularly fond of art. And so we were giving her other things that she could talk about. And I liked your idea of comparing, talking about the quote and then the Bible verses, even comparing the two together or comparing it to other Bible verses. So you don't always have to talk about the art. I feel like we always gravitate to that because just it's a beautiful visual. But if you are not, if you don't really like it, then there are other things that you can do to compare. And I like booklet one. We just had book week one last week, and so we're talking about ex nihilo means out of nothing. And so I was like, well, what does that mean? What does that have to do with math? Right? And they're like, oh, zero's nothing, right? And then, or what does that have to do with God? Well, He created everything out of nothing. So you can have those connections just with the title, depending on what it is. So I'm glad that you mentioned about not necessarily always having to go to the art.
Yeah, it's a what a great reminder that we wanted to provide a hospitable introduction or invitation into the content instead of just jumping in with the charts, right? That may feel overwhelming to a student who is still learning how to read a reference page like that. She wanted them to have that hospitable invitation into the conversation. And that invitation, right? We know that that invitation may need to be a little bit different for different students. And so, Babs, I appreciate you saying that because for some, the art may not be as interesting, but they may really respond to the words. And so, as a tutor or as a parent at home, we really want to encourage you to use all of those pieces together.
Yeah, I love what you just said about it being hospitable. I have 5 children and they're all artistic, and pretty much none of them has had a history of loving math. So for them, it's been just a really lovely invitation to gently kind of ease into this thing. Anyway, so our families really appreciated it a lot, and it kind of like the fact that the artwork is the same each year for a particular week and across the levels. It kind of gives a visual of like week 4 is, or we're in week 5, aren't we? That picture every year for all the kids, like it makes week 5 a thing instead of, I don't know how to even explain that, but it's like it's like this is one of the parts of the whole. And oh yeah, I remember this week. It just gives like another tag or another name or another label to this part of our math year. Anyway, does that make any sense?
It does. No, that was great. And
Yeah,
I liked,
Good.
that the art, being the same every year creates that muscle memory, that, oh, it's the multiplication week this week, when you've done it multiple times. So it can go both ways, where, oh, it's the same picture. We've seen this again. So then we have other things to talk about. Well, let's talk about the quote, or let's compare it to last week, and let's compare it to, let's look forward to next week. So I think that that there are so many different ways to use so many different parts. It's such a versatile curriculum.
thank you. So I'm reading a book and I'm not going to give you the title because I haven't finished it. So I don't want to sit here and be like, "Oh, this was a great book." And then you find out that no, it really wasn't. But in the very beginning of the book, it talks about secular, symbolic, and sacred math, and how most of the what happens in traditional modern education is all secular math, and it is all designed for commerce and everyday living, that it's not designed to point you to anything. And I think for most of us, that's the math that we're familiar with. And so a lot of families, when they look at the math map, they go, well, where's the math? And that's what they're looking for, is the secular math. And we have, even I have a tendency to do this. I want to encourage parents, oh, it's all in there. Everything you need to know about mathematics through high school, it's all in here. You're going to get to it. You can practice the computation. And it was encouraging to me this week to hear it parsed out this way, this idea that that's the secular piece. And it matters to us in terms of wanting to be able to order our days, not be overdrawn, create a budget, take care of our families, right? Design spaceships, whatever that is, that the secular math matters, but what we want to, that's never going to be what engages our soul, right? That when we think about the sacred math, that's where our souls are going to be engaged. That's where we're going to really be drawn in. And I may not be explaining this right. I'm early in the book, but that there's this symbolic piece helps to bridge that gap from our secular math experience to what are these patterns that we see in creation that are going to ultimately draw us to God. And so that sacred piece is that seeing the unseen piece. And it's so important because students who are not encouraged to look for the sacred, right? They're never going to be interested in the symbolic. Right. And so when we're talking about our covers, what Jana and Kristen just said, right? It's so important for us to recognize that the sacred piece is as important, if not more important, than the secular piece. And we've said this many, many times. This is just a new way of saying it, that it's tempting perhaps to rush through these conversations on the cover because we think we need to get to the math. But this piece of our week, this piece of our day is as important, right? The sacred, helping our students to be pointed towards the sacred and discover the sacred is at least as important as the secular. So then moving on, also on day one, we take our time to look at our math map itself, our scope and sequence page to see where we are. So you can see that our check marks, the check marks are growing here. Eventually those check marks are going to be gone and these examples are going to be gone in our challenge page. So remember that's there for students to take notes. And in our foundations level domains, we will continue to have this assignment guide as a guide for at home.
Kirsty, can you remind parents why the challenge page doesn't have it? Because we've had a couple questions about that. They'll have two and they're like, why doesn't my kid have a little outline?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the outline for the challenge students is in the challenge guides. And so we want to encourage students to be using that challenge guide and not just their curriculum, but to use that challenge guide to notice the order of their days. That order matches and should be very close to what you're seeing with the foundations order, but it's intentionally left in the challenge guide because that's where all of their assignments are for all of the strands. Also, eventually, we want students to really start to use this page for notes. right? Whether that's notes in community, hey, my tutor said this, I learned this, I heard this, somebody asked this great question. They can write that on their notes page. Perhaps they have a question they want to take to community, so they could use that at home to write down what questions they want to take to community the following week. Or perhaps they're using this just to keep track of any aha moments, or they're using this to keep track of ideas for the lesson 29 booklet. It really is intended to be a space for that challenge student to keep track of their ideas and their notes. And so that's why we really want the bulk of that page to be blank for them to be able to use that. And then after we've invited our students to the conversation, we've seen where we are, we come to our lesson pages. And we've talked about experimenting. So we're only in week 5. I really want to encourage you, if this is your first year in the math map, to feel free to continue to experiment for a few weeks. If it's your second year and you found a great groove that worked last year, don't be afraid to experiment and see if it needs some tweaks this year. Babs and I were just saying this morning that we met with a tutor and we could see the difference in the tutor from this time last year and this time this year, what a difference it makes to be doing this your second time around. So if it's your second time around, or for those families that have been piloting the curriculum your third or fourth time around, feel free to continue to tweak and experiment in these early weeks, or any week. If something feels like it's not working, switch it up. Many years ago, I remember listening to Mark Hayes speak at a director's dinner, and it impacted me so deeply because he talked about the importance of not just allowing the challenge guide to become a taskmaster for your student, but to be continually talking with them so that you found the balance between doing the things that are in the challenge guide so that you were prepared for that unified conversation in community, but also tailoring where you need to meet the needs of your student. And that's what we want you to feel free here with the math map, is remember that you can tailor this curriculum in so many different ways while still being fully prepared to have a unified conversation with your family and with your community. No other math curriculum supports that. I actually had somebody ask me today, why did you start with Challenge A? And that really was the number one reason why we started with Challenge A, was because there was a need there that no other curriculum, no matter how well all of the students, right, try to stay on track with every other curriculum, it's almost impossible for everybody to be doing the same 4 lessons every week. And without naming, right, we all know what curriculum I'm referring to that we've used, right? But those 4 lessons didn't necessarily go to each other. So if you were just off by 2 or 3 lessons, what you were working on at home may be vastly different to what everybody else in your community is doing. So we lost that opportunity to have a really unified math conversation over work that we've been preparing for community. The math map was intentionally designed to meet that need of having one topic that we're going to look at and discuss each week, while still allowing for parents to tailor the work to meet the needs of their family. So don't ever feel like you have to stick with one model. And that's why what we're doing this year is to try and give you lots of different ideas so you can find the ones that fit best. Don't forget that you can compare those domains and work with your olders and youngers together or separately, because it was designed to really support families working together, not just on community day, but at home. We talked last week about grouping pages either by order or by content. And this week's strategy maybe should have been our first week's strategy, and that is just to read the pages aloud together. If this is your first year through the math map, you may just be working on being able to read the notations, being able to decode the words. And so a great place to start with your students is just to read the pages aloud. That may be you as a parent modeling that. It may be that your children are reading it, right, and helping you decode. It might mean that you're looking up some words ahead of time to help your students to know what certain words mean. It may be that you're sitting there with your flashcards. I know Babs has said this to me. She'll like pull out her flashcards. That to her is a great resource for what is this symbol, and go through the flashcards and find it. So just reading those pages aloud is a great, it's a great way that you can introduce your students to these ideas, demystify what those overwhelming pages are, and start there. So if day one you read the pages aloud together, and day two they work on those pages, day three maybe you read the next pages aloud together, and day four they work on those. Maybe you just get through 8 pages, or maybe you just get through 4 pages. It's okay to do that and to slow down and take the time to read the lesson pages. Does anybody have any ideas on strategies for lesson pages?
Well, I don't know that I get, in a way, it is an idea. It's just that reading aloud is so big. And the nice thing about reading aloud is younger children can participate way earlier because they don't have to be able to read a multi-syllable word. They can read a one. They can say one eye, or they can say 6. So I think that the reading aloud, even though in some ways it's been the thing that's been ignored in math, and it's made math less accessible to people in general, because if you can't read it, then there's no way you're going to understand it long term. But it is also one of the best ways to include our younger children and build that math confidence. So I think reading aloud is just the most brilliant thing ever. I remember one of the first workshops that I ever went to, that you and Lee were saying, reading aloud, if that's all you did one day, it's not all you did. It was big, and it brought a lot of value in. And just having those approaches made a person, like when you were talking earlier about it's not just calculations, it's so great to become a math person and not necessarily be only a calculations person.
I love that, Jill, that you are a math person, not a calculations person. Right. That brings us to our lesson pages, page 1. Does anybody have any questions about these pages? And that could just include, hey, can you tell me how you read this, right? I know that sometimes people just want to hear things said aloud or read aloud. Is there anything on these pages that anybody would like to talk about?
It's
I am
amazing
gonna,
there's nothing weird. I mean, like, I feel like there should be something that I don't know how to pronounce, but these pages, I actually think I know how to pronounce everything this time.
Is there a because today when we're working on the page, it says the variables usually represent by the letter X. Is there a history behind that? I'm just curious, because why not any other letter? Why X?
I'm not really sure. I'm sure there is a history, and I may have even read the history, but it's not in my memoria. But I think that a lot of that just comes from that so many letters were perhaps had special meaning. Like an S oftentimes is a side, an R is often a radius. And so different letters oftentimes had different purposes. And X, Y, and Z they're really the axis labels that we're most familiar with. So
Mhm.
really, when you see an X, what that's really talking about is like up here, right? If we were to think that this is the X axis, then that's why we're using the variable X. If we
Yeah.
were using the variable Y, we'd be looking for a Y axis. So a lot of times we see the work without any axes being there, but that's what it goes back to. And I think it was just because they were the tail end and they were not commonly used for other things. But a
Mhm.
variable can be any letter. So you'll see that Lee sometimes uses A's, B's, and C's. Interestingly, if you look at a lot of traditional curricula, they introduce the idea of a variable with A's, B's, and C's. And then at some point when we get more mathy or more advanced, we switch to X, Y, and Z. So I don't know why A's, B's, and C's are supposed to be friendlier. Um, they're all variables.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I just thought I would, because we do get a lot of questions about parameter, scalar, variable, and coefficient. And so I did think I'm just going to address this here so that if somebody is watching this and curious. So the first thing that I'm going to really look at comparing is a parameter versus a variable. In the math map, to try to clarify the difference between the two, we italicize variables and we do not italicize parameters. That is specific to the math map. That is not necessarily true about any other math curriculum. But that will help you to see how we were intending that letter to be used. In both cases, it is a letter representing a number. In the case of a parameter, it is usually representing a specific instance, like one number at a time. So here, if you see 3a, we're basically saying that it's representing one instance of the variable, not right of that letter is representing one specific instance. So when we talk about slope and we use m, when we look at an equation, it has, when we eventually put a number in, there's just one number. We don't look at all the possible m's, we just look at one. And so it's a way that we can write out an equation for a whole family by saying every equation that looks like y equals mx plus b, all of them make a line, no matter what the m value is, no matter what the b value is. But if we looked at any particular line, we would have that m represents one value and that b represents one value. The variable represents essentially all possible values at the same time, right? So if we, again, thinking about y equals mx plus b, if I said that my m was 1 and my b was 1, then it's y equals x plus 1. Notice my y and my x are now saying all my values of y can be defined by all of my values of x plus 1. And so I'm now looking at the relationship between all of my y's and all of my x's. They're really representing a whole set of numbers. The parameters really are kind of one number where a variable is representing a whole set of numbers. And I think for adults that we get that, I think that's going to take time for our students to pick up on that. So don't go home and think you have to explain this to your students, right? For them, for your younger students, it may be enough just for them to go, hey, one of these is an X, one of these is italicized, and one of them is not. The other two that I would really like to contrast is a scalar and a coefficient. A scalar is a number that does not have direction. Now, it can be negative. When we think about a scalar being negative, it means to reverse versus giving us direction like it would if it was a vector. So a scalar can reverse something and it can multiply it. And it can either make it bigger or it can make it smaller. It's scaling it. So that's what a scalar is. And it's based off of its job. The coefficient is based off of its location. A coefficient typically goes with a variable. So they're like partners with the variable. And notice that its job is to scale the variable. But when we're talking about its location and where it is, we call it the coefficient because it's next to the variable. So when we're looking at these algebraic expressions and we say, what's the coefficient? We're saying what number or parameter is next to the variable. And so that's what we're talking about there.
So just to clarify, or just to make sure I understood you, would you say like the coefficient is a species of a scalar? Or did I hear that wrong?
No, I would say they're like in this example here, 3 is a coefficient and it is a scalar. I guess all coefficients are scalars, but not. So I guess maybe yes, but it's more that they're just doing different. It's just a different description, a different one is a job word and one is a
Yeah.
location word.
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
yeah, I would be more likely to say that 3 is a coefficient and it's scaling X. Like its place is that it's a coefficient and its job is that it's a scalar. Does that
Okay.
help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So on day 2, don't forget, continue to drill your flashcards. And our special page for today is our invention page, where we want to encourage practicing those common topics of invention. So each week we're talking about one of our common topics. We'll just keep going through them. And this week I wanted to talk about relationship. And I'm trying to leave these questions broad so that you don't feel like you have to do relationship with lesson 5, right? If you are taking 5 weeks to talk about definition, that's great. You can save these questions for when you get to your 5 weeks with relationship. So I'm trying to leave these questions somewhat vague so that you can feel equipped in any week to use relationship questions. As I mentioned, one of the things that we talk about when we think of relationship is order. So just look at the order of the page. Don't worry about the math concepts, but what is first on the page? What is next on the page? What is last on the page? What should be read from top to bottom? Is there anything that should be read from left to right? So just talking about the order of the page is a great way to practice thinking about relationship. Another way that we can think about relationship is the idea of cause and effect. And I thought that one way that you could help your students to think about cause and effect is to look for verbs. So for example, here, where we talk about scalars, and it says positive scalars preserve direction. Right? That might be a hint that if it's positive, it causes the direction to stay the same. If it's negative, it reverses. So if it's negative, it causes the direction to reverse. So if you're looking for some cause and effect, you could maybe sometimes look for verbs. And if one thing does something to something else, that might be a hint that we're looking at a cause and effect relationship. Then when we're thinking really about math, when we think about relations, we're thinking about connections between sets. So we're either connecting or relating or mapping ideas. So for example, here, and for these first few weeks, I think Lee includes this function diagram, right? And so a function is a specific type of relation, and it tells me what's the relationship from my input to my output, right? That my function is really causing the change, right? Or mapping the change. So you can look for things on the page that maybe connect, relate, or map ideas. Those are some relationship questions. Are there any questions about that?
Well, once again, not a question, but just a comment that that's so great to think, to look for verbs, to look for relationship. Like we look for nouns for definition, and we look for adjectives for comparison. And anyway, I've just, and adverbs maybe for circumstance. I don't know. I've never thought of that before. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, we should maybe make that whole list because I like what you just did there. That was good. So that brings us to page 2. Are there any questions about anything that you see on these pages that you'd like to talk about? All right. So day 3, we still want to be drilling that grammar, but we also want to encourage you to take advantage of those quick flip arithmetic games. And just a reminder that our last 10 weeks last year, we went through one game and all the different ways that you could adapt that game. And so I want to encourage you to feel free to go back and just watch those first few minutes of those book club episodes if you're looking for some ways to tailor those quick flip arithmetic games to your particular student. One thing that I told somebody this week was a great way for you as a parent, if you are using if you're using cards or dice to create practice problems, and you as the parent don't want to do all the calculations involved, it's a great way to play beat the calculator, where you get to hold a calculator and you do the calculations on the calculator while you're challenging your student to beat the calculator, either in accuracy or in speed. And that way you get to check their work, make it fun. And if you are looking for ways that you can do that, the Desmos apps are one of my favorite. You can actually download their scientific calculator and it will actually let you calculate in fractions. So I know that sometimes that's for all of us when we want to calculate in fractions, the calculator will actually do that for you. And that way you as a parent can make sure that you have an accurate answer to check your students' work, but it makes it fun. So looking at our I-cubed Memoria and arrangement page, remember, this is the page where we want to practice our core habits of Memoria. And so the habit I chose for this week is to express. And I came up with 2 M's and I felt like I needed a third. So we have 3 M's, even though, what's that word when it's the same, somebody who's in analogies, there's a word if it is all the same letter, but they sound differently. Anybody?
Alliteration?
Well, no,
Let's-
there's another word for it because it's like movement model, but then it's mnemonic. And so it doesn't sound like M anymore. And there's a word for that because they're all M words, even though, anyway, it's a different kind of, not quite alliteration. So we'll have to find it for next week. So somebody get your analogies book out and find that for me. But these were my prompts that I came up with, right? What movement could help you remember something on this page? What model could help you remember something on this page? And that could be something that they draw. It could be something that they build, right? There's a lot of different ways that we could create a model. Or what mnemonic could help you remember something on this page. So we've got movement, right? If we're moving the models, and then the mnemonic is really using our words and coming up with clever sayings or abbreviations to help us remember. So those are some ways that we could express in order to help build our memoria. Does anybody have any other ideas for expression that they'd like to share, or some specific movements or models that have been helpful? All right. Watch our social media because we did have a tutor who created a fantastic model of the Euler diagram of the sets. And I'm pretty sure Babs got a picture. So if you are intrigued by the idea of building a model, watch our social media page because I think Babs got a picture of that. And I thought it was really great. Great way to show sets. All right, that's bringing us to page 3. Anybody have questions or comments from page 3? All right. So moving on to day 4, we're looking at our games from the back cover as another element that you can bring into your day if you're looking for some ways to practice some of the ideas that we're looking at. And it doesn't have to be that week's game. Feel free to pick a game from a different week, or you might have a favorite game that you play every week. But those are some great ways that you can bring some community into your math practice, or find some fun ways to practice the math concepts or the calculations. Looking at our careful calculations page on this day, wanted to talk a little bit like we did with the quick flip arithmetic, that the careful calculations page is a great page to use as a model for practice computation. And so what I mean by that, I'm going to bring my pen on here, right, is if we look, for example, at one of these like this, I'm going to write it out here, I times 3 plus I. So maybe I need to help my student practice this a little bit more. I can use this as a model. And I could say, well, I'm going to leave my eyes the same, and I'm just going to flip cards to replace this. So now I could have I times 13 plus 1, I times 2 plus I times 7 plus I, because it's going, flipping cards is going to make it random, right? So I can I can create all kinds of practice computation based off of these exercises. So if there's a particular section on here that your student struggles with and you want to create more exercises, use this as a model, right? So let's look at, I know I'm using the monomials because that's the one that I can see, but this is 3 plus 2x times 5x. Right? So I could say, well, I'm going to leave my x's the same, and I'm going to flip cards over for each of my numbers. Or I'm going to flip cards over for just one of those numbers. Or if I need my student to practice with fractions, maybe I flip 2 cards. And so I flip 7 thirds plus 7 sixths x times, and I flip 9 fourths x, right? So I flip 2 cards to create a fraction. I could flip 3 cards to make 3-digit numbers, right? So notice that I can use those cards and build whatever practice problems that I want to off of these model problems. And then, as I mentioned, that idea of using, right, if you're creating your own exercises, it's a little bit harder with the algebraic ones to play beat the calculator, but certainly anything that requires computation, playing beat the calculator is a great way to check answers. Any questions about this strategy for our careful calculations page?
I think I found out the word that you were using for analogies. Is it assonance?
I think so. Yes.
Assonance. Okay. Yeah.
I love that idea of flipping cards because that's a question we get a lot is, what if I want more calculation than what's on this page? And so just flipping cards and saying, now write them on a piece of paper, or hey, they could do mental math, right? If that's something they need to work on, they could do mental math. So I'm always amazed at how many games you can play. Like when we did quick flip, I was just like, wow. I mean, and I think you only really did one game, but you changed up that one game every week. And so how many games we can create just by using a deck of cards, to me, is just crazy.
And it makes it feel a little bit more fun than just having drill sheets. And it also means that you as a parent can really hone in on, right? If my student takes a look at this page, right, and they can do everything except that they're really struggling with this section, right? And they're just struggling. Or maybe they're struggling with rewriting mixed fractions, right? I can now say, okay, that's what we're going to practice. You did great on the rest of the page. You didn't struggle with that, but we need to do some more rewriting of mixed fractions. So now I'm going to flip 3 cards, right, that are going to create my mixed fraction, and they have to write it. So it lets me really customize the practice that my child needs, um, and create as many problems as I want to. All right, and that brings us to page 4 of our lesson pages. Are there any questions about anything here on page 4? We did have somebody ask this week about, right, with younger students, some of the like multiplication or subtraction or addition where we have to maybe borrow or carry. And so I wanted to point out that these cases here, right, where we're using place value to explore these ideas, this is a great opportunity to express this either with a place value set or pennies or buttons, um, right? You could say, or even money, right? You could have tens, your pennies, your dimes, your $1 bills, right? And that's your ones, your tens, and your hundreds. And so physically trading, right? So if you take some money out, and most countries, right? So even if you're watching this in England or Canada or Australia or South Africa, I'm trying to think of all of our English speaking international communities that may be watching this. Most money is in a base 10. And so if you pick out your ones, your tens, and your hundreds, you can model your money, right? You can use your money to model your sums or differences or your multiplication. And that might actually help your students to see, oh, I'm taking my $1 bill and I'm trading it in for 10 dimes, right? Or I'm taking my dime and trading it in for 10 pennies. Or I've added these 2 numbers and I now have 16 pennies. So I'm going to trade 10 pennies in for a dime. So now I have to put the dime in the dime column, right? So those are some ways to express and practice this so that your student starts to get a sense of what they're doing. So they're not just memorizing these floating wands, right? We as adults are practiced with that and we understand what we're doing. For our students, they don't often see that trade just because we say, well, borrow and carry. That doesn't necessarily help them to see that trade. So for our youngest students, actually giving them that tactile experience to express it and make those trades can be really helpful. Some of our older students might like that too. And it might also be another way to really emphasize the idea of place value, especially in base 10. Or if you're trying to practice other bases, right, using objects that could represent a 1, a 2, a 4, an 8, for example. And so that they can then see this idea of trading is the same. We just have a different amount that we would be doing. And so that brings us to our reminder that we have lots of support for you, that just, right, our live book club or the archived book club is free to everybody. There are no restrictions. That is, everybody is welcome to join us. Everybody is welcome to email us. Babs is amazing. I don't know if she sleeps. because I will see her answering people at all kinds of hours. And I'm always like, hey, you need to sleep and you need to rest. But she really takes it seriously, making sure that that people's questions get answered. So join us here live, watch the archive, and email the mathmap at classicalconversations.com. That's open to everyone. If you are in community, if you are a member of CC Connected, right? If you're in community, you're a member of CC Connected, and the Math Map is a great resource to you. We're constantly adding content. It's a great way to go in and compare different domains, go and look at the glossary. I'm getting really close to 1,000 words. I really just need a few more. So if anybody's got some words, send them to me. But it's a great resource. We don't want to teach our students didactically, but we recognize that sometimes our parents might need a more didactic explanation so that they can then in turn help guide their students to understanding, right? We want to be lead learners, but sometimes we need it to be a little bit faster. And so that didactic explanation of those ideas is going to be found in the companion. So we really want to encourage you as parents to take advantage of that. And then our forums, we have all kinds of forums. It's another great place to ask your questions. So if you're in CC Connected and the forums, right, if you're in community, you have access to this, and then one another, right? Homeschooling with a friend, doing the math map means that you can work together to understand these ideas. Does anybody have any questions about where to go to find answers or get support?
I do have a question. We were working through complex, and so I was looking at the errata sheet, and I was told that there's first of all there's 50 pages of the errata sheet, and I think I was told it's because the first 25 pages is for the printing earlier, and then the next 25 pages is for the 2025 printing. So I have privilege to that information because I have insider information, but I'm just thinking about my clients. I think they would get really overwhelmed by just looking at the sheer amount of pages of errata. Like, I think one of the comment is like, wow, if this is a minivan, it should have a recall on it. And and I was going through the errata because I want to just go ahead and correct it before the year start. And some of the erratas are already corrected, so you shouldn't be in the errata sheet anyway. And some of them are overlap. And so the order of the errata is, you go from booklet 1 to booklet 28, but some of them you will jump back and forth from different booklets. So that's also a possible pressure point for some of the parents. So I was wondering, is this any way we could remedy that situation?
Well, I know that Babs has been working with our editor. As you can imagine, it is a mammoth job,
Yeah.
right?
I
Yes.
appreciate it. I definitely appreciate all this fine tuning. So I'm not complaining. I'm just
It's a mammoth job, and
yes.
we're trying to get it right. And we're trying to there's constant revision being done, and so we're constantly trying to keep track of what is an error that we need to get out there, what was just a helpful change or a clarification which maybe doesn't need to be in the errata. So we're constantly trying to stay on top of it. I know that Babs and our editor are working really hard to make that as user-friendly as we can. Yating, I would absolutely encourage you, if you have some specific ideas, feel free to email us. And as we're looking at, any possible rearrangements, we would welcome your input. Doesn't mean we'll always do it, but we would welcome your input.
Oh, please make sure, I appreciate the math team. This is by no means a complaint, but maybe just a point of discussion. Yeah, I mean, maybe just have that point while this set of errata sheet is for if you bought this in 2024, and then maybe have 2 documents instead of one combined document. That I think that will be my first point of suggestion in doing that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let me comment on that just for a minute. So Jenny has already redone the following: digits, integers, fractions, and monomials, and reorganized them by booklet number. So before they were organized by location, it was like all the I pages, all the charts, and then the lesson pages. So you kind of had to search 3 places. But now you just go look for your booklet and you have I pages and charts and lesson pages all in one little section. So that was very helpful. So Jenny just did that this morning. The only one she hasn't finished is complex, because you're right, that's the biggest. But if you look at the top of the page, it tells you which booklet to look through. So it'll say copyright 2024 or whatever is in the book. And so the first booklet, the first set though, should be the most current. And then the second section, which starts on like page 26 or 27, that's last year, or that's last year's printing. So if you're seeing something that you're like, oh, that's already corrected, then maybe you need to look at the other errata, because we're trying to make sure, like, everybody that bought one last year, if it's been corrected in the new one, well, they don't know that because they only have last year's. So we're trying to keep up with what changed, as far as errata. And so that's why you might have seen something that looks like that. So that's one change that's already been made. And so, yeah, she's working really hard to try to make that a little more approachable. The thing about the two, and I think this might be a sales thing, because I think we are only allowed to have one link because we sell only one in the bookstore. So we're not selling last year's, we're only selling this year's. And so we only have one link for errata. So I think we have to put them together, but we'll definitely take that, feedback and take it to the team and see if it's possible. It just gets tricky when you have multiple printings of the same booklet, And so we don't want to just leave those people out in the wind that bought it last year just because they don't have the current one, because they can still use it. So I just wanted to give you that update, because I just checked the digits and it's already live, and I only asked her this like a couple hours ago and she's already done it. And now she's working on complex. So I think that'll make it a little bit easier now that we don't have to search 3 places for errors. They will just have one. So at least we're getting there. We're on the right track.
Great conversation.
There was a question in the chat. I think it was answered, but just wanted to make sure. It's what are the parentheses around the vectors called? And it looked like somebody said the notation cards called them angle brackets.
Yeah,
Just want to make sure that was right. Yeah.
that's what we always say is angle brackets. So
Oh, I think I said ankle. Because it looks like ankle bracelet. I'm not attending very well to the letter and the formation of where it goes.
all right. And every week we want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions. So doesn't have to be from this week. If you had questions from this week, I hope you felt invited to ask those as we were going through. But you can certainly ask them now, or any other question that you have.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Actually, I have feedback too on the errata. I actually went today to look at some stuff, and it was organized in the monomials by the booklet. I'm like, oh, this is great that it's organized by that. And I have to search, okay, is it an error here, an error there? So that was wonderful. I appreciate that. I saw that this morning. That was great. I have a little testimonial to share, if that's okay.
That's great.
Okay. Yesterday was week 2 for us in our challenge B class, and we were looking at the number notation. We've seen this artwork through Math Map at Home different times. This is a familiar piece to us. So one of the students in our class noticed, well, why is that tree branch, or the tree branch trunk crooked? She's like, that's weird that it's crooked. And I'd never quite noticed that before or thought about that. And so we're kind of asking, well, why would a tree branch be crooked, or what happened, or what could cause that? Or like apple trees, they have to prune them back. I'm like, well, why would you prune an apple tree? And so we're kind of talking about why you need to prune something or take something back. And one of the girls said they had to prune it so it could focus its energy on what's important. I'm like, oh, so what does that look like in our life? Is there things that we need to maybe focus our energy on and what's important, and maybe cut out things that aren't important? But it was just like this girl, it was like a Proverbs. I was like, oh, yeah, and it just clicked. And it was just so exciting. I never, that branch has always been crooked. The last 2 years, that artwork is always the same. It was just like an aha moment. And, it doesn't quite look perfect to us, but it looks perfect to do the job it does. So like to the world also, like as Christians and us homeschoolers especially can look odd to the world, but we're doing what God created us to do. And that was just exciting. That was part of that conversation too. And I just never noticed that before. So it was an amazing conversation and an aha moment for our whole class yesterday. And that was amazing. We love that artwork. And
That's beautiful.
I just
Thank
had
you
to
for
share
sharing.
it. Like I got to come on today and share. So I have that. And I do have another question. I've got that, but I ask a math question too at the same time. My math question is in regard to booklet 2, and this goes back to this is on page 10. And I'm thinking when you tell me the answer, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, duh, this makes sense. But I still don't I've compared it to last year's. I've looked like at the errata, I've looked here. And so I'm at page 10. I'm not sure, are you there?
I am.
Okay, so it says estimate the repeating decimal to the 10,000th place. Okay, so I'm looking here. So the first one is done for us. You round the 6 to the 7. But then some of them get rounded and some don't. So I'm trying to either find the pattern or find the rule. And I think I just can't remember why.
Right. Well, I am going to actually, I'm just going to do it here on my
Okay.
screen. And that way I won't do it with the highlighter. And while I'm getting my pen up, would it be okay if Babs was to kind of extract your testimony and share that? Because that was beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Definitely.
All right. So let's look at 0.19 repeating.
Correct. Okay.
Babs, you're amazing. Although I think that you may be in complex, not in
Oh, she didn't say complex. Oh, sorry.
We're in
B
monomials. That's okay.
monomials.
Yep.
Oh, gotcha.
So in thousands place. So I have the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, the 10,000s.
Okay.
And then my next digit would be a 1. So this is just going to be 1919.
Okay.
Then 487.3 repeating would be 487.10s, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. Again, it's going to not change any.
Okay.
So 17.2 repeating, I have 17.10s, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. My next place would be a 2, doesn't round up. Negative 3.10s, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, but my next digit would be a 7, so this should round up to negative 3.7879.
Okay.
And then 0.10s, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. My next digit would be a 2, so that is not going to round up. And so that's what I get. So if the answers are different,
And
that
yep.
might be an error.
So that's correct. So when it stays, so I'm trying to kind of figure out this pattern here. And so you have to look to like 100,000th place to figure out if it rounds up or not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think that helps. I was
Conversing
trying to figure out from those numbers and I was having a hard time. So thank you. I appreciate that.
And the last one, isn't the 1 the only thing that's repeating according to what's on that page?
Yep. See,
Yes.
and hence the importance of attending, because this should have been 0. So there's my 10s, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and it's a 1, so it doesn't repeat. So it should have been 6211. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
That's what we're here for. That's a great question. Any other questions? Well, just a reminder, we are happy to entertain any and all questions. So feel free next week if you have more questions to bring those. And if you have questions in between and you are a tutor, or if you are a parent of a challenge age child who has a tutor, remember that tutors can come to help desk every day. They can sign up for a time slot with me. So questions are always welcome here, but directors have that other opportunities to come and get help. So feel free to take advantage of those as well. Well, thanks everybody, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Enjoy. Hopefully everybody will be able to enjoy a long weekend. I know when we were still actively homeschooling, sometimes we didn't always really enjoy the long weekends because you still had the same amount of work to do. So
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Have a great week.